Hello, my name is Matthew Mount, that's right. And I'm here today at Shawnee National Forest, very deep in Illinois' forest, that's right. This is a national forest unlike any other national forest. It is one of the largest national forests in the entire United States of America. This national forest is one that is beyond wonder. It is a forest that goes hundreds of miles, travels from, or a person could travel, I should say, from one side of the forest. That's right, a person could travel from one side of the forest all the way to the other and cross the entire state. That's right, that's how big this is. It takes a pretty decent percentage of the state. And behind me, you can actually see it. That's right, the Shawnee National Forest. You can see how beautiful it is. And the reason why I chose this spot specifically is I'm here to talk to you about the Feast of Tabernacles. That's right, one of the ancient Jewish feasts. A feast that is so incredible that is being celebrated every year by Jews ever since the Exodus. That's right, ever since the Jews came out of Egypt, something like 3,000 years ago, it's still being celebrated. It is a time when for 7 days, actually around 8, the Jews go out, they build booths for themselves known as Sukkot, which are partially enclosed, partially not enclosed. And with those Sukkot, they live in them. They live in them in the wilderness. It has a way of inviting both physical people that are corporally with us and spiritual people by having them partially enclosed, partially unenclosed. And it's really a time when the Jews could have spiritual experiences. That's right. It's kind of set up for that. And the reason why this is so important today is because in the Gospel of John, it is the Lord Jesus Christ himself at the very last day, or the last and greatest day of the Festival of Tabernacles, Sukkot. He actually came out and said, if any one of you is thirsty, come here and have a drink, And he presented this idea of never thirsting again. Now, what he did that on is called the water pouring service. And the water pouring service is a time when people would basically pour water, and that water would be poured to sort of maybe commemorate the time when Moses struck the rock, water gushed from the rock, and actually 600,000 Jews drank from the water that came from the rock. The entire nation, that's right. 600,000 Jews in the desert drank, that's right. 600,000 Jews in the desert drank the water that came from the rock. And we understand that rock to be Jesus. And so when that water pouring service occurred at the very end of the Feast of Tabernacles, and Christ is basically saying that, he's offering this water that you may drink and never thirst again. What he's basically saying is that he can provide this living water. He can provide this water for you to drink and have basically everlasting salvation. Instead of the Jews that drank in the desert, the wilderness, and perished, very much different than that. And what this tells us more than anything is it tells us that we can have something very special in our lives, something that the ancient Jews would have been out in the desert for 7-8 days at a time and may not have had, something that Christ offers us. And what it tells us especially is that when we go out into the wilderness and when we live for 7 or 8 days, when we do that, what it does is it shows how we're willing to go out into a barren land that has no great support for us, unlike our homes, and we're willing to go into that land of death and life, where God actually provides directly the means for us to live, that we're willing to do that and not be dependent upon the world and its system for our subsistence for at least 7 days. You know, the Jews practicing idolatry and then having to go into the wilderness for 7-8 days at a time, it really trained them. It trained them to not depend upon those false gods, to depend upon the true and living God. Because if they're in the wilderness, they're in the desert, they could die very quickly. You could die very quickly without water. You die very quickly without food. And the fact that God provided both food from heaven, which Christ called basically is considered the manna that came down from heaven. The fact that God provides the manna that comes down from heaven to the Jews in the wilderness, and the fact that He provides the water, the living water, is very significant, that you may drink and never thirst again. It is significant because when you take that water, when you're in that situation in your life where you have to be totally dependent upon God in order to substantiate you, and you take that water from the rock, from Christ, and you drink it, you take it into your substance, or it becomes part of you. Your body transforms it, or it transforms your body, however you look at it. When you take that water in, what it does is it gives you a certain unity between that which you are consuming and that which you are. And that which you are consuming comes directly from God. The manna came directly from God. It did not come from people making it, manufacturing it. It did not come from a field. It did not come from anything like that. It just came directly from God. And the water, the same way. I mean, Moses hits the rock. You wouldn't expect water to come from a rock. Moses hits the rock. The water comes directly from God. And the point in this is that when we celebrate Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, as you were, we're celebrating a holiday that teaches us to be totally sufficient in terms that we're totally dependent upon God. We're totally dependent upon God for all that we are, all that we have. We're totally dependent upon God to the extent that we don't fear somebody over us, let's say, putting us into a cycle of death. Like, for example, we don't fear a boss that could fire us, that would cause us to be homeless, that would cause us to lose our family and cause us to die in a homeless shelter. We don't fear that because we're over death. We don't fear death. We don't fear death because Christ rose from the dead, and if you believe in Him, He'll raise you from the dead too. He'll raise you from the dead despite how bad it was that you died. And so what that means is that you don't have to be forced into a situation where you feel that it's either A, I feed my family, or B, I do the right thing and I don't feed my family and my family starves, so thus it's not the right thing. Or somebody's forcing your hand to do the wrong thing. They're forcing your hand, somebody's forcing your hand, let's say, to do the wrong thing because they're basically saying, there's a pile of money that you will lose getting if you don't do X, Y, and Z. And if you do X, Y, and Z, then you'll be committing great evil. But if you don't do X, Y, and Z and you lose that money, then you lose everything you have. Well, even if you do lose everything you have, and you're out in the wilderness, the point is that God provides. He gives the manna that comes down from heaven. He gives the water from the rock. He provides from His very self. He provides if He's leading somebody into that situation. If Christ is leading you into righteousness, if He's basically imputed into you His righteousness, and this is the next step in your development, then it could be a very good next step. Now, I hate to say that. I would hate to see anybody lose their home, their family, or anything like that, and live in the wilderness because They would rather do righteousness for righteousness' sake than to do evil. But at the same time, it is very much the case that we don't have to fear death. We don't have to fear death because Christ has conquered death. He provides us the very substance that we need to live and to live life eternal. And so I thank you very much for watching. I hope that you continue on with the series. May God be praised. Thank you.